the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you are answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
All right, so we're going to talk, as I said, my strongest background is in the waste end and recycling. So we're going to talk about garbage, and then we're going to sort of lead our way through sort of what you do now, which is sustainable materials management, kind of a focus. But I want to give you a background that you're probably not going to ever hear anywhere else, because I think it's important. One of my favorite words is context. To understand where did things come from? Why are we where we are now? And when you understand that, you have a better sense of going forward in a sort of a logical and tangible way. Garbage is amazing. It is absolutely fascinating. It's always relevant. It's ever present. Unfortunately, it keeps increasing. We've had a little bit of success with generation reduction of late, but overall, it's continued to increase. It's a core public service. Unfortunately, it costs a lot of money. It's hyper political. And when I gave my little speech before about the things that are important for you, I think the one I kind of left out is understanding politics. You must understand politics, or you're going to get extraordinarily frustrated in your career. And when I say politics, I don't want you to think about the gubernatorial election that's coming up next week. I want you to think about, and remember this, the bus stop for my little kids. Okay? There was a politics to lining up for the bus in the morning. We use the term politics to think about politicians, but politics is part of life, right? It's part of the dynamics of classrooms. It's part of everything. Understand politics, because you'll at least understand why things happen because they do, right? Otherwise, you're going to get frustrated. We're going to talk about the politics of garbage. It's a fascinating public policy dilemma, and it's kind of like the final frontier. Will we ever get to zero waste? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about, sort of where we are as a country and as a society in trying to drive toward zero waste. So what I'm going to do, I kind of said this already, I'm going to do a little bit of a history lesson. I'll try to go fast on that. I don't want to bore you with history, but I do think it's important that you understand, because it's the foundation of even questions that you already asked about incentives for recycling. I'm going to describe where we are today, talk about some of the challenges that we have, and then I'm going to try to give you sort of my top 10 of what we need to do to really push the envelope to get toward zero waste and what will be called, what I would call true sustainable materials management. And then I'm going to give you an overview of Bayshore, because I think Bayshore kind of exemplifies a place that is committed to sustainable materials management. And I think it'll kind of bring the more amorphous stuff about the history and everything else kind of together in a very concrete example. At least that's the intent. And more than anything, I'd like this to be as informal as we can be. Can we have questions along the way? Does that work? So,
Yes.
Please do not hesitate to ask questions. That's the value of this stuff. It's not me being a talking head up here. It's sort of taking your questions and giving you whatever feedback I can. Okay? So, kind of where did it all begin? Let me kind of paint the picture for you. Back at the time, because it's changed, believe it or not, New Jersey in the mid-'70s had 567 municipalities, which is insane. We're 7,500 square miles. We're a tiny little state. I think we're the third smallest state in the country. and we're the most densely populated state in the country. So how interesting is that? And phenomenal challenges because our history, and I don't know if you know this, the sort of our founding fathers that we talk about all the time, right? You have linkages here. They were largely agrarian. So the founding fathers from Virginia, Washington, and Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, they wanted the United States to grow up as an agricultural country. And one person was different. His name was Alexander Hamilton. And he was the first treasurer of the country. And he had a mindset that you had to be industrial. So he actually cited the first industrial city in the United States of America in my hometown, which is Paterson, New Jersey, to generate power off of the Great Falls. And if you've never been to Paterson, take a trip to the Great Falls. It really is something special to see, and it is amazingly historic for us. So the point of that story is we grew up as an industrialized state. So on top of garbage, we had this phenomenal history of chemical production and petrochemical production and pharmaceutical production. And when you do those industries, you have what? At the end of the day, you have waste. And where did that waste go? It went in all the wrong places. Okay? It went directly into wetlands, into rivers, into the ocean, throughout the land. And so we have this tremendous legacy, unfortunately, of pollution that came from our economic past of these types of industries. And the irony is, did anybody guess what our #1 element of the New Jersey economy is? Anybody? Tourism. We have 127 miles of the most drop-dead gorgeous beaches, I would argue, in the world. So we have this weird dichotomy of all this pollution and this really special coastline, we have 4 different geologic provinces just in a tiny state of New Jersey: Ridge and Valley, the Highlands, the inner and outer coastal plain, which are the shore areas in South Jersey. So we have this fascinating kind of makeup that all leads to what happened here. So I mentioned 567 towns. When I first started at DEP, we did an open dump inventory to see how many landfills, or they weren't landfills, they were dumps. They were dumps. How many did we have? We had 630. So every single town in the state had a dump, and some were special, and had 2 or 3. And it was an absolute mess. And towns were primarily overseeing, if anybody oversaw, what happened, with another intern from Bayshore, what happened with waste. So the legislature said, you know what, this doesn't work. And in 1975, they passed a major change to the law to remove the piecemeal, uncoordinated activities of 567 municipalities. And what they did was really interesting. They took all their authority for garbage away, and they vested it in the 21 counties. And you all seen Giant Stadium. That area is called the Hackensack Meadowlands or the New Jersey Meadowlands, and that was sort of a special district. So politically, that was fascinating. It took all the power away from the town. They said you can have nothing to do with garbage, and the counties are going to do master plans. And at the time, these master plans, the counties never had this level of responsibility. So it was a brand new thing for them. It was a really big deal. Counties are the weakest form of government in the state of New Jersey. Primarily, they manage a few roads, some county parks, a couple of county jails here and there. And for the first time now, they have this major responsibility. Oh my God, we got to do garbage. And so what do you do if you're a political body and you've never done something before? You hire a consultant. So they hire consulting companies to come in to develop these 10-year master plans of what are you going to do with your garbage and move away from this mess that we have. Well, all the consultants did the same thing. They all looked to who's doing it best in the world. And who was doing it best in the world was Europe, and primarily West Germany. And what they were doing was making energy from garbage. And what they had done is they built essentially power plants. Picture a coal-burning power plant, but a power plant run on garbage. They're called resource recovery facilities, mass burn incinerators, whatever term you want to pick. So counties had the responsibility of thinking about siting new modern landfills or more modern mass burn incinerators. And we did something really interesting as a state. because we're like, gee, how do we deal with this? And the other piece of what's important for you to understand in your education, in addition to politics, is economics. You have to understand economics, because that is the other thing that's the bottom line that makes the world go round. So at the time, all those dumps I mentioned, the average cost to dispose of your garbage was 99 cents a ton. 99 cents. The average today is $78. So there's your difference. So it was 99 cents. We looked at Europe. All these consultants looked at Europe, and they said, well, what's it cost to run these mass burn incinerators that, make energy from garbage? And that number came back $34 a ton. This was back in 1970s, 1980. So like the question became, how do you bridge this economic gap of 99 cents as a norm to get to $34 a ton is what you need to actually run a facility that's going to work. And we did figure out ways of doing that, which I'm not going to get into. But just, visually, this is what they look like. I've been to almost every dump in the state. This is what they look like. They're absolutely disgusting. And most of them, if you own land, and it's today we call it wetlands. If you owned that kind of land back in the 70s, the 60s, and the 50s, you couldn't do much of anything with it. You didn't have sophisticated pile driving technology for engineering to actually utilize that land. So what a lot of people did is they said, you know what, I got a hole that's kind of wet, I'm going to put garbage in it. And at the time, there was no distinction whatsoever from what I said earlier to your answer of the type of waste. So what went in those holes was solid waste, hazardous waste, radiologicals, sludge, septage, everything. They were disgusting. So when the federal government came out with the first Superfund listing, New Jersey had 10 of the first top 20 sites. We had #1 in the country, which is the La Parry landfill down in Gloucester County. Quite a distinction. So we were kind of known as the garbage state. Not exactly the image that we want to have. Birds, tremendous odors, fires. Landfills produce in an anaerobic environment a lot of methane gas. That methane gas is dangerous. We had people light a cigarette in a scale house in a landfill and literally blow up and die. We had an unscrupulous developer in South Jersey at the Toa slope of a huge landfill build a senior citizen housing complex. And as a little grunt guy working for DEP, I went out there with a little device called a pogo stick, where you measure concentrations of methane gas. And there were explosive levels of methane gas under people's sinks, throughout their backyard, their front yard, throughout their house. It was truly unbelievable. So landfills create a lot of gas. We had a fire at a landfill right below the Pulaski Skyway, right? That burned for 15 or 20 years. 15 or 20 years. And finally, the state was so frustrated that we hired a specialty firm that dealt with oil fires down in Texas from the oil rigs called Boots and Coots. And they actually came out and figured out, finally, because it was a hazard, because the smoke from the fire was constantly impacting pedestrian travel across the Pulaski Skyway. So some pretty scary stuff. You get the point. Landfills are kind of a mess. So the early response to this with these master plans kind of interestingly came back the same. And this is something that happens very often in public policy. And I don't mean this in any disrespect to this engineering audience that we have, is people focus on sort of the end game big box solution. And that's what happened. So the counties, when they had to do these master plans, they all came back, almost all of them, 19 out of 21 came back and said, we're going to build a $100, $200, $300 million mass burn incinerator. And we're going to burn the waste and we're going to get energy. And a bunch of them said, well, we're also going to build a landfill kind of to go with that. And that was totally over-designed. That was way, way over the top. The state would be bankrupt if we had ever built all those facilities, because again, this is county government dealing with this situation, right? So it's kind of a government thing. What we wound up doing, which is a real important point for context that I want to make to you, is we did this solid waste planning for the entire state of New Jersey at one time. Even though it was in pockets by counties, I don't think any other state in the country has dealt with a statewide issue like we did. And we could do that because we were so small. And because the solutions could be arrived at in cooperation between counties. Like I actually live in Pennsylvania now. I live in Bucks County. And I'm being a little over the top exaggerating, but in a way, we have Philadelphia on the East Coast, we have Pittsburgh on the West Coast, and we have very little in between. And that's the truth. We have State College and Penn State, but there's not much there. Think about New Jersey. I think about where we are today and that density. So it kind of lent itself to doing statewide management. And what we did is unprecedented in the country. We actually, through this county planning process, went ahead and built and put in place 12 modern landfills, as opposed to the kind of open dump I explained. We actually did build 5 of these mass burn incinerators for energy recovery, and we built 12 waste transfer stations to move waste. Essentially, a transfer station is you take a little garbage truck you can picture on the street, and you dump your waste at a central place, and you reload that waste into a big transfer trailer for longer haul transport. So we built 12 of those. And here's sort of the point to our discussion about sustainable materials management and the public policy focus on big box thing. Not even a discussion about not producing waste in the first place or about recycling. Wasn't even on the radar screen. Not talked about at all. So you probably, oops, I'm gonna stay here. I got a little pointer. Yeah, okay. So,
you move around up to this.
I can move around here?
Yeah.
Okay. So you probably know how modern landfills are designed. As opposed to literally a hole where you just dump the garbage. A modern landfill has a double composite liner. It generally will have a clay membrane. There's a state standard 1 to the -7 centimeters per second percolation in the clay membrane. They're usually 2 feet thick. On top of that, there'll be a big piece of plastic, which is a hypalon or some other thick 40 mil or bigger piece of plastic essentially on top of it. And then a second membrane, a second liner, clay membrane, second liner, and then perforated piping to collect the leachate. And the real, like, what's the real problem with a landfill? There's 2 things. There's like nuisance stuff. Nuisance stuff is they stink, they catch on fire, which also can be dangerous. But the primary issue is leachate. And leachate is, again, a term of art, but basically my analogy, which is disgusting, particularly since you went to Dunkin' Donuts, is that when you make coffee in the morning, what really happens, right? You take a medium, which is coffee, and you put it with a filter thingamabob, you pour water over the top, and what happens? Magically, you get this great drink that we want to drink. It makes us all hyper, right? Well, the same thing happens in a landfill with rain. So you take all this garbage and think about, and it's hard for you, it's easy for me and for some of us to think back in time what was actually in your garbage. There's a lot of nasty stuff. There's cleansers, people would throw their motor oil in there, there'd be all kinds of stuff. And then it would rain, and the same thing as the coffee analogy, that will pick up the physical characteristics, the chemical characteristics of the waste and produce a liquid which is nasty called leachate. So in modern landfills, you collect all the leachate that goes to a wastewater treatment plant. The gas is all positively evacuated. So for these large landfills, they'll have active gas systems that get connected to turbo generators and are actually producing energy at each of the 12 landfills that are out there. They have groundwater monitoring detection systems. The leachate systems actually have leachate management and leachate detection. If there's a breach in one of the liners, you'll know about it. So they're sophisticated, they're gated, they have guards full-time, scales to weigh everything. That's really what a modern landfill is. Okay? Now what happened? Try this. Sorry? Ah, okay, that works. So just to give you a visual, if you've never seen sort of a landfill under construction, this is the membrane, which is probably a hypalon membrane, or the leachate collection laterals and so forth. You get the idea. You do this stuff all the time. This is where the landfills are. As a rule of thumb, the landfills are in the less populated areas of the state, the more rural areas of the state. This is what a mass burn incinerator looks like. Anybody here been to a mass burn incinerator? Okay. A few of you? Okay, yeah, they're very interesting. They are power plants. You have one like right near you in Essex County, which is the largest in the state at 3,000 tons per day. This is kind of what they look like on the outside. You know, schematically, they're really not all that complex. Basically, your little garbage truck comes, dumps waste into a pit. The pit can be massive. The pit at Essex County is probably a couple football fields in size, just to give you a visual. I mean, a lot of waste. 3,000 tons a day is a lot of waste. The material is picked up with a grapple. It's dropped into a chamber. These chambers have reciprocating grates. So a reciprocating grate is the same as if you had a set of stairs and every other one moves. So it's tumbling the waste down. For combustion, like what do we need when we have a charcoal grill? You need airflow. So you have what's called under fire air and over fire air. So you have under fire air coming up through the grates as the waste is tumbling down. You have air blowing down from the top, so you get a nice mixing of that waste material. And when it's combusted, the heat that's given off, the walls of these units are lined with thin water tubes. And that is heated, it creates steam, goes to a generator, makes energy. From an air pollution control standpoint, you know, it's very important that you have both particulate controls, which are either electrostatic precipitators or bag houses, and then, excuse me, acid gas controls, essentially scrubbers. So these plants, the 5 of them that were built, have at this point operated for 30 years. And this is where they are. Essex is the largest. Essex, Union, Camden, Gloucester, and Warren. Total capacity about 6,300 tons a day. Please.
There are a few questions online.
Sure.
First one, do you also perform tests and measure leachate in groundwater before and after landfill location?
I'm sure that they do. Yeah, I'm sure that they do.
You are out of the
I moved where I wasn't supposed to. Sorry.
And the next one is the social cost of carbon also included in the economical analysis when planning for a mass incineration unit?
Absolutely not. The question was, is there a carbon calculation? No, these things were cited and designed back in the 80s where we weren't talking about carbon footprint really in any way, shape, or form. So it really predated that. You know, is that something, would that have been an interesting criteria? It really would have. And I should just for a moment, just to paint the picture of how controversial it was to, like I blew through this really quick about these 12 landfills, these 5 incinerators. To actually develop those facilities, I don't know if you're familiar with county governments, their political bodies called the Board of Chosen Freeholders. And they had to literally stand up at a public meeting and say, I'm going to put this rotten, stinking, garbage landfill or incinerator right in your backyard. Because they had to pick the exact place they were going to put these things. These public hearings were out of control. They were wild. I'd been spit on, hit with vegetables, had a guy in Salem County go this far to punch me and say, you scum, you're not worth it. Had my car surrounded and shaking the bumpers, right, to like intimidate and everything else. I mean, they were like bloodbaths. It was unbelievable. And I tell that story because it took tremendous, back to politics, political courage for these freeholders to pick these sites. It was a really, really big deal because people were afraid. They were afraid of the impacts of them, which is totally understandable. Totally understandable. But the good news is they had the courage to do it. And the incinerators I just mentioned were designed to operate for 20 years. They're all round numbers on their 30th year. And they run extremely well.
Right. The landfills are actually the origin of the NIMBY syndrome out in my backyard because that was, like, again, nobody wanted that stuff.
Absolutely.
But that needed to be done.
Absolutely right. The NIMBY thing was like a huge sort of a mindset and just, you know, just so different. I had a really neat opportunity in 1983 or 4 to go to West Germany and actually tour 8 or 9 mass burn facilities. And just to give you an example, at one of them, I think it was in Essen, they built the community center for the town directly connected to the mass burn incinerator. So there were like 2 driveways. You'd pull in. On the left, the garbage trucks would go to dump the garbage. On the right, you'd go to the community center. And the community center had a really big couple Olympic-sized pools, and they heated the pool with the energy from the garbage incinerator. My point being, like 100% essentially socially accepted. All right? Here, we never had that. We really haven't. And it got to the point, because I had a lot to do with permitting all of these incinerators, the public demanded, but believe it or not, demanded that we construct bedrooms in each of the plants for the DEP inspector to be able to stay there 24/365 to make sure that they were operating safely. We also connected to each one of these things remote sensing, essentially, that would be able to detect the priority air pollutants in the stack, and essentially through continuous emission monitors send data directly to the first floor of the DEP building. And if there was any excursion of any of the priority pollutants, the bells and whistles go off for the SWAT team to go in and shut down the incinerator. You know, it never came to that because they run well. You know, I'm not like a big incinerator fan. I'm just telling you factually, they run really well. And the landfills have also operated for, 10, 15, 20. Landfills are really interesting. I call them like the cosmic English muffins. You know, you put like butter on an English muffin, where does it go? It kind of like melts away. It's the same thing with the capacity of a landfill. They never seem to fill up because there's so much weight that they constantly settle, right? So the landfills that we built are way beyond their design capacity, but they're still operational. And the infrastructure I just mentioned to you was all built essentially in the 1980s. All is still operational, and I would make a prediction to you, there will never be another major waste facility developed in the state of New Jersey. Like, never is a really long time, so that's an exaggeration, but not, and certainly in my kids' probably lifetimes. Yes?
One operational comment, if you want to go back to the diagram of the waste energy facility, is the tipping floor and how important it is that they operate that tipping floor pre-inspecting the materials that have been dumped from the garbage trucks and the trailers.
Absolutely right.
That's the reason that these can operate as well as they do. If they didn't do that sorting actively on-site, physical sorting and inspection of that, you wouldn't get this kind of reliability.
Yeah, no, it's true. And the guy that runs that little grapple, the crane thing, like think of the Jersey Shore where they try to get the little doll, right, with the grapple thing. It's the same kind of thing. And they have to be very, very conscious of what they're grappling. And I'll give you an example. You have a truck pull in with a load of tires, and you dump the tires in that big pit. Man, if that guy picks up a load of just tires, he's going to blow out portions of the water walls because the BTU level is going to go out the roof. So they've got to mix it all. They have to have somewhat of a homogeneous mix before they actually put in. So your point's well taken.
White goods or
propane tanks,
PCB containing, there's
anything.
lots of things.
Yeah. So it's a pretty big deal. All right. So we got up to recycling. So again, all the stuff. I talk about economics a little bit. To build that infrastructure I mentioned as a round number, about $3 billion with a B dollars. $3 billion with a B dollars to build those incinerators, the landfills, and everything else. So a lot of money. And as a rule of thumb, not 100%, the landfills are public. So county governments had them built. So basically on taxpayers, right? And the incinerators are private, okay? Public and private. So all these things are well underway. They've been cited, they're getting developed. And the first recycling program was actually a volunteer thing in 1982. It was called Recycling in the 80s. And it was Boy Scouts mom and apple pie. You know, it wasn't really something taken all that seriously. And then we had a debate, which started in 1986, which was really fascinating, where New Jersey became the first state in the country to adopt mandatory recycling. And it kind of goes back to your question about incentives a little bit. No incentives, mandatory. You got to do it. So what did that mean? That meant, essentially, overnight, changing the behavior in the kitchens and houses of 8.8 or so million people. A really big deal. And we think of recycling today as being a very popular thing. I think people think of it as a popular and an important activity. Very controversial. When we first brought in mandatory recycling, and I'll give you sort of my personal example, I always liked the recycling end, so I worked for the Division of Solid Waste Management, and solid and hazardous waste. We were located in a little junky building in Trenton. We had about 150 employees, and I started the first recycling program in the DEP. And it was just for the 150 people in this little building. And what I had to do, because government's government and fascinating, is they couldn't support it, so I had to do it myself. So I went out and I bought everybody a little box about this big, and it was just an office paper program. And I made up a little label of what you're allowed to put in and not put in, and I gave them out to all 150 people. And every morning I came an hour and a half early before work, and I went around and collected everybody's stuff, put it in boxes, put it in the basement, and I found a market, which was a paperboard company, made cereal boxes called Homo Soap. It's been on the market on recycling. So I would bring all this stuff there, once a month, and it was working. The people, my peers at DEP, hated my guts. I was Darth Vader. Like, what are you doing? Because what did it represent? Change, right? Isn't change hard? I mean, your generation's different. Like, they change the apps every month or so, right? But then, change was even bigger than it. But people always are resistant to change. So on the statewide level, to try to get the public to do this, we actually hired a public relations firm called Keys Martin, and they developed radio spots, TV spots. We lay at the Jersey Shore. Usually you're laying there and the sign will go by, that says buy this or go to this bar, whatever it is. We had the state's logo, and the logo was really corny. Sort of in my generation, the big thing was the cowboy and Indian kind of a thing. So we actually adopted a slogan of a sheriff's badge from the Old West. And the slogan was, sort it out before you set it out. Recycling, it's the law. And the connotation was, if you don't recycle, we're going to get Sheriff John Brown to come down and throw you in jail. And we sort of had that out everywhere. We even hired a magician. His name, this is really corny. Ready? R.E. Cycle. And he would go to all the schools, and he would talk about recycling and why it's important and everything else. The point was, it was a major, major campaign. Yeah.
So at Stevens, we're okay at recycling, but there's definitely a lot of room for us to improve.
Yep.
And particularly in universities in general, I've noticed that there's two barriers to recycling. There's, you have the student factor. You have, where students aren't educated necessarily about what is recyclable and what is not. And so if they have to think more than 2-3 seconds about what they're going to do with their trash, they're going to probably trash it or put it in the wrong bin.
Yep.
And then the second barrier is the facilities staff and making sure they don't all go to the same place, separating the trash and recycling. What do you recommend? I mean, obviously, the university is very different from, municipality level, but what is a...
No, but it's the same thing in a way. And I guess what I've learned in all these years is advocacy and education is number one. You can tell people they got to do everything under the sun. And if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. So you need, male and female cheerleaders. You need people that are into it, that are pushing the envelope to get people to do it. You need markets, which we'll talk about, which is extremely, extremely important. Because the enforcement side is very weak. It's just very weak. You can enforce by law, but it's very, very difficult to do that. So it's primarily advocacy. I mean, in a nutshell, that's what I would say to you. It's primarily advocacy. And we're going to talk more about that, but it's a great question. And what you said about mixing stuff together and the custodial staff sort of connecting the dots there, it's great. A lot of times it doesn't happen. So people do the right thing, say university, all put everything out like that, and then it goes in the same container and it goes to the landfill. It's great, but your head explode, right? Right? Can't happen, but it does happen. It does happen. Yeah, I'm going to move quickly. I'm going to move quickly. So,
we have 15 more minutes.
only 15. Okay. So we get mandatory recycling. At least 3 materials plus leaves had to be recycled. So then, for the first time, we started to look at source reduction, which is not producing waste in the first place. The best example that I always use is lawnmowers. If you get a mulching mower, right, you don't have to pick up the clippings, you don't produce the waste. Materials reuse like Goodwill Industries, garage sales are really a waste reduction strategy, if you will. Use car dealerships, right, things that we don't think of, right? Otherwise, these things go to junkyards and they become waste. So recycling, when you sort of hear that word, I always think of mom and apple pie and all that. What recycling really is the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. It is extraordinarily complicated. It is commodities exchange. And what we have at people at Bayshore do nothing all day but hawk markets for commodities. Think about what's in the waste stream. Plastics, cardboard, paper, aluminum, other metals. constantly looking for markets. Plastics, we have 5 different materials that we pull off of a stream that have to be marketed. So when you think of recycling, please think of the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Incredibly complicated, incredibly cutthroat. You need 3 elements for recycling to be recycling. You all participate in collection because you bring stuff out to the curb, you put it in your class paper thing, whatever you do. You're part of the collection side, and people come and collect it who are professional organizations. Bayshore is the largest processor in the state, so we take that stuff and we take it back apart and we send it out to markets. And markets, if you don't have a market to send material, you don't have recycling. So whenever you see that chasing arrows, they're called, the 3 chasing arrows, think of collection, processing, and marketing. If you don't have all 3, you don't have a program. So today, recycling is still mandatory. We have goals in the state of recycling of 50% of the municipal waste stream, 60% of the total waste stream. What's the difference? The total waste stream includes really heavy stuff like big I-beams, construction, demolition debris, stuff like that. And the municipal waste is basically what you put at the curb. We generate about 21 million tons per year, and 12.8 million of that get recycled. So the state, under 214 data, has achieved a 62% total waste stream recycling rate, which is quite extraordinary. It's certainly among one of the best rates, probably the best rate as a state in the country. So total waste stream, we've done very well. The challenge has been the municipal waste stream, which is a little harder. We've never hit that 50% goal. The highest I think we've gotten is 42%. This past year was actually 41, but last data year at 41%. Benefits of recycling, cost avoidance. Average, as mentioned, disposal costs about $75. The value of recyclables, and this is very generic, about $50 per ton. So $125 per ton you lose when you throw away and you don't recycle. Preserves landfill space. Nobody wants to go through siting those facilities again. And here's some, you mentioned carbon, here's some sort of off-road, just back of the envelope calculations on benefits from a carbon standpoint and of an emission standpoint with vehicles. So what do we recycle now? The original plans I mentioned that went back into the 80s was 3 materials plus leaves. So the only recycling that took place was bottles, cans, and aluminum. Bottles, cans, and paper. And now its average is 16 different materials that get recycled in the county plans that are required for recycling. And no one is exempt. I didn't make that point. No one is exempt. So we mentioned the university. Universities aren't exempt. Hospitals aren't exempt. Stores aren't exempt. No one is exempt. So future plan of attack. The poster child of recycling right now is food. We've never had effective food waste recycling in the state. I had an opportunity working with our state organization, and I got to draft a piece of legislation that's going through the state legislature now. It was passed by the Senate in the spring. It's Senate 771, sponsored by Senator Smith, who heads the Environment and Energy Committee for the state. It will probably be taken up by the Assembly. This is a bizarre period of time. We have the election next week, and then we'll have a very short session of this legislature. What happens is the legislature basically has to be re-elected every 2 years. So that's happening this year. We're getting a whole new legislature. So all the bills kind of get thrown out and have to start again. So we'll have this very small window from essentially a week from Monday or Tuesday out until first week in January to see if we can get a food waste bill passed in the state. And if we have time later, I could talk more in detail about what that bill says. I think it's very important. After 30 years of mandatory recycling, 26% actually of what's left in the garbage can in the house is food. So it is sort of our frontier. I'll skip cross media. The other one you kind of hit on with your question about Stevens, commercial institutional recycling. We have failed miserably. The towns have done a great job, and that infrastructure is all in place, and we keep designating materials that people have to recycle. But man, how many universities, hospitals, stores, Wawas, supermarkets, blah, 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 commercial, institutional, anywhere that you've been, do you not see a sign, not even an opportunity, really, to recycle? And that's really the other fertile ground between food and commercial and institutional. Advanced materials recovery, and I'll talk a little bit about what Bayshore does with that and try to give you an example. and really to institutionalize the mentality of what you're into, which is instead of looking at this as waste, look at it as opportunity. They are materials, they're sustainable materials, and they can be managed. Construction and demolition debris, I'm going to talk about a little more. Try to have a connection between waste management and renewable energy, which I'll talk about with Bayshore. And really the problem here to get to zero waste, sort of as a nirvana to reach, is not technological. The technologies exist. I interview all the technologies that come to Bayshore for evolving stuff, and the technologies work. The problem is they're too expensive. Because what is our problem? The bane of our existence in the United States in this field, believe it or not, is land. We have too much land. So you can still develop, relatively speaking, cheap landfills that make cutting-edge technology to push the envelope on recycling economically prohibitive. That is the problem. That's your assignment, I guess, to look at as you become professionals, how to help figure that out. And we can talk a little bit more. I have some ideas on how we can do that. Bayshore, I'm going to go super duper quick. We're the largest recycler in the state. We can take over 10,000 tons a day. Remember I said the biggest facility in the state is that Essex garbage incinerator, right? That was 3,000 tons. So we're basically essentially four times larger than the largest garbage company in the state. We have tremendous access. We can take material by truck, rail, or barge. And our ultimate vision is to run an eco-complex and energy campus and have 100% green business powered 100% by renewable energy. That's our corporate goal. This is sort of what, did I skip a slide? No, I didn't. Everything gets weighed, right? Comes in on trucks. This is sort of the breakout. We run 7 different but related recycling companies. So 2,500 ton a day is concrete, asphalt, brick, and block. What does that mean? Recycling bridges, roads, parking lots, houses, stuff like that. 4,500 tons a day is through a low temperature thermal desorption unit for non-hazardous petroleum contaminated soil, which we'll touch upon. We run a 1,000 ton a day materials recovery facility for bulky waste. That truly is, picture your house getting knocked down. We basically are recycling all the material in the house. And a part of sort of this overview, I don't want you to just think of bottles and cans for recycling, because you can recycle almost anything. And that's sort of the point of this discussion. We have a scrap metal business. We can process dredge material, source separated food waste. We haven't built a facility yet, but we're approved in our county master plan to develop a 500 ton per day facility. We take 1,000 tons a day of the stuff you put at the curb and have a fully mechanized system to take that stuff back apart. We can take industrial slag, consumer electronics, water treatment plant residual, and street sweepings. That's a mouthful, right? So this is our facility.
Gary, can you elaborate on that water treatment residual part? Like
Which one?
The water treatment residual. Like, what do you guys do with the WTR?
We don't get much. We can accept it. It's sort of it's an alum sludge based material as a rule. So basically, blending of that material for beneficial use. We only send material for beneficial use to brownfield sites or for landfill cover. So basically, it would be a blending because we take so much soil. We can blend, provided the analyticals are all fine and everything else, we can blend and then reuse materials. And that's primarily what we do.
Okay. I ask because I've been working with alum WTS for a while now.
Yeah.
We are recycling them as a filter material. Actually, we
Yeah.
are taking the alum out of the sludge.
Cool. Very cool. Very cool. Well, we should talk about that.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is Bayshore, just to give you a sense, and the companies are labeled. So real quickly, the facility that takes concrete, asphalt, brick, and block, the types of materials we accept are on the left. And what we do, and this is a great business model, like some of you are interested in sort of the business end of things, we get paid, picture a building in Hoboken that gets knocked down, it gets put in a container, they drive it to Bayshore, we recycle all that material. And what we're doing is we're manufacturing aggregate. We're manufacturing aggregates that we then sell for road-based construction, like the turnpike widening or whatever else. So this is the old building that was in Hoboken. And the other beauty of this business model, it's a very simple device. It's a crusher. And the crusher looks like this. It's very low labor. So you only have a few people that have to operate. You need a front-end loader who's going to pick up the stuff, drop it in a crusher, somebody that runs the machine, and you're manufacturing piles and piles and piles of aggregate. and we will market different size, all based on Department of Transportation specifications for the roadway, and we'll send this all out and have it sold. So like right now, and this goes back to recycling being the stock exchange, we normally have a lot of material around, and it's fascinating to try to run these businesses. They're so competitive. And we just had the greatest summer ever for projects. So we have no material. We blew it all out. And there are other times where we have, our owners are named the MONTECALVO, they call it Mount MONTECALVO, because it's a mountain of processed material. So it's like, it's different all the time. The low temperature thermal desorption unit, we can accept non-hazardous petroleum contaminated soil. So what does that mean? Our biggest customer is PSE&G. Anytime they dig in a road to repair an electric line or a gas line, or if they raise a substation post-Hurricane Sandy, anytime they dig in the dirt, it's mildly contaminated. So what we take is mildly contaminated material that has these types of constituents, comes in looking like this. We run it through a screener, up into a conveyor, and then the center piece, the round piece, is a rotary drum. So material is fed in. It's batch fed, so we do extremely heavy-duty analytical testing up front, or we get the testing from the customers. We review that to make sure we're allowed to accept it. This thing will run its low temperature. It'll run anywhere from 950 degrees to liberate the petroleum hydrocarbon. We have afterburners and a particulate removal system, basically baghouse system, a quench tank to cool the soil. And then the soil that's been remediated we'll send out to beneficial use projects or times for landfill cover. We have a pretty good county contract for landfill cover. So this thing takes 4,000, we can take, I should say, this doesn't take, we can take 4,500 tons a day, and on a averaging thing we got approved through DEP, we can take as much as 6,300 tons a day. I mean, that's like off the charts amount of material, just a phenomenal amount of material. Here you get paid well on the incoming to take the dirty dirt, and then you do processing, and then you don't have a lot of value on the end material. It's basically a giveaway, but it's a cost avoidance when you look at $75 a ton to actually dispose of waste. Is what it looks like. Again, very small, right? Veronica and Sean can certainly speak to how small it is. We do an old-fashioned metals business. This is sort of my favorite, and I don't have time to sort of go into some things that have happened at Bayshore, but this processing line, that we had a big fire, and we lost this business, and we're in the process of rebuilding it. But essentially, it is recycling of houses. So the analogy I like to give, if you had work done at your house, maybe your folks' house, whatever, you take down the roof, take down the deck, clean out the attic, basement, doing a renovation, all that stuff goes in a container on your driveway. That comes to Bayshore. A system of size separation, which are basically tines. That'll do a size separation, 10-inch and above, 2 to 10-inch below 2-inch. Then 3 processing lines like this, or conveyors, where you literally have people doing what's called a positive pick, picking off commodities. So each employee will have a certain material they're pulling off: clean wood, painted wood, aluminum, cardboard, paper, whatever it is. And on average, 40% of what's in that load from your house is wood. And what we would do is take the clean dimensional lumber, which is essentially 2x4s that have been in your wall forever and never been painted, and blend that with any vegetative material we'd have on site, and we produce the precursor to landscape mulch. The adulterated wood, like if we took down this stuff, and I don't know if there's anything wood here, it's all veneered, but you get the point. Anything that's been stained or painted, we would blend with a very small fraction of paper, corrugated, and plastic, and produce what we call an engineered biofuel. And you'd have to see this stuff. I mean, when it comes out, it looks like beautiful landscape mulch you'd want to put on your yard, but we would send it to a paper facility to make paper. So we talk about sustainability in your world. So through a facility like this, it may have been your roof and your decking in the wintertime, and then it could actually be coming back as part of the landscape mulch in your yard in the spring, and the paper that your kids are using to do your homework, right? So to me, that's sustainability. Waste, process conversion, and then marketing of material, and then actual reuse back in the economic mainstream. We run 3 different operations for the curbside stuff. And what we're doing there, it's the same kind of thing. We have, and you'd get a kick out of seeing that kind of facility because it is nothing but machines. You know, it's like 70,000 square feet of machines from front to back, and you know, there's stuff you could picture that you put out in front of the house will come into a large tipping area, and then it goes up through what's called a metering bin, and then there's a bunch of star screens that process the material to float cardboard up, so you separate the cardboard, you separate all the paper, there's magnets for the metals, there's optical scanners, and the optical scanners are so sophisticated today that these processing lines really move quickly, and the optical scanners will be able to tell the difference between a high-density polyethylene and a polyethylene terephthalate piece of plastic and shoot a differential stream of air to blow it in a different direction. So, you know, it's just all these different machines, and basically all we're doing is taking apart what you mix together at your house. And then we market all that material out. As I said, the marketing is a full-time job. You know, this is just, I still, like, I see this stuff, it's like a little kid at Christmas morning, you know, to see all these materials collected and going out for processing. We had in our main building about 10,000 solar panels. We got about 40% of the energy necessary to run the soil operation from rooftop solar. Today, while I was away, I'm hoping that we finalize the deal to put rooftop solar on another building at Bayshore. And then for us, we've actually looked at kind of everything from an energy standpoint. Rooftop solar, we looked at wind. Wind doesn't work. If you've been around wind or you've studied wind in your classes, the turbines are enormous, they're loud, they have ice throw issues that have been very significant in the state of New Jersey. That's pretty much been addressed by industry, but it is an issue. And our site's too small, so we probably can't do that. Similarly, we're right on the Raritan River, so we looked at tidal energy. There's some really cool entrepreneurial technology to take the flow of the tide and turn underwater, essentially, turbines to make energy. But that the Raritan doesn't have enough flow, so that probably doesn't work. So for us, it's going to be rooftop solar and biomass gasification. And I'm sure you know gasification's been around since the early 1900s, so that technology works. But we don't have a commercially operated biomass gasifier in the state of New Jersey. So it's going to be a cutting edge thing, and that's between the rooftop solar and the gasification, we hope to be able to hit that total self-sufficiency. So when you're in the recycling world and you're looking at new opportunities, what do you look at? You look at what's not being done, right? That makes sense. So food waste, I could talk about it in the question and answer part. Food and sludge, which is an interesting combination. Tires, no one's really come up with an effective, economical way of processing tires other than in cement kilns for cement production. Glass is a real problem. We've looked at some really cool cutting edge entrepreneurial stuff for glass. I mentioned gasification and Class A. So I sped up to try to get close, and I'm still over. Open it up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.